it's I want my ATP. So it's because the science is called epigenetics, which says, am I turning on or turning off these genes? And so you want to pick behaviors that turn on the repair genes and turn on the anti-cancer genes and turn off the damaging ones. So you can have bad.
Welcome, everybody. This is our first interview session that I'll be conducting with colleagues and friends and experts and influencers from all over the world. And today, we welcome Dr. John Sottery. Dr. John is a graduate of Bates College, and he's got his PhD from Duke University. He has been published and he has presented all over the world. He has his name on a number of patents. He is a scientist that brings to us today some interesting and new concepts on health and wellness and well-being. And Dr. John believes the concept of aging normally, in his words, is a disaster. So the old ways of getting old don't make sense anymore for a number of reasons. One, I would assume, based on what we're living in specific, what we're living in today. It's a whole new world out there, but also because there's a lot of new breakthroughs all the time. There's new things that are happening and lots of opportunity to empower ourselves as individuals. And so we have Dr. John Sottery here today to talk a little bit about this. Dr. John, welcome.
James, great to be here, and I appreciate you having me on as your first guest. And so I'm looking forward to a great discussion. And
so let's get right into it. Tell us a little bit more about these concepts of aging normally and what you've come to learn about the better way.
Sure. Yeah. I guess for me, I've always been obsessed with trying to understand how things work. So when I was a little kid, something would break and I'd get the tools out and I would take it apart and try to figure out, why did this break? How does it work? What went wrong? And as I got older, I guess I'm a third generation PhD chemist. My father was a PhD chemist, taught at the University of Maine for over 30 years. My grandfather taught at Bard College, did his doctoral work at Columbia. In fact, one of the buildings at Bard is called Sottery Hall. It's named after my grandfather.
Wow, what a legacy.
So
I didn't know that about you. That's fantastic.
Wow.
Great story.
So I was always obsessed with understanding how things worked. And as I started to understand chemistry, what I realized it was kind of the secret to the world, because you could figure out how things worked at that molecular level. And a lot of times you could solve problems that maybe that were inaccessible to somebody else. So I didn't get married until I was 40. I didn't have my first child, and my wife and I didn't have our first child until I think I was 49 when Angelique was born and 50 when Zachary was born. And I realized, wow, I'm going to be in my 70s driving these kids off to college, and I don't want to be an old man. And so right now, a couple months from now, I'm going to be 61. And I have spent the last 30 years reading the scientific literature and studying all the breakthroughs to try to figure out what goes wrong in the body at a molecular level, and then what can I do about it? Meaning, once I know what's going wrong, what can I do about it? That's one part of it. And then the other side is your body, unlike your car, is constantly repairing itself. And there are things we can either turn up those repair processes or we can turn them down. And so I want to do everything I can to turn on cellular repair, to turn on cellular cleanup. And when you do that, your skin looks better, your cells are happier, you have less cellular junk. And so to me, I focus in on the molecular side because that's how I think about problems and how I attack them. And part of that's nutrition, and part of that is supplements, and part of that's behavior, and then part of it is just other things, whether it's taking saunas or doing intermittent fasting or whatever. There's a whole bunch of different things. problem I think that most people have is they don't realize that it's a multi-parameter problem, meaning they don't realize that there are 30 different things that you have to work on, or 100 different things, and they find one thing, like they say, oh my God, I went low carb, and I lost all this weight, and I feel great, and they make their whole world just about low carbohydrate. And I think to myself, that's great, and it works, and it can help your metabolism, but that's one piece of the puzzle. And then other people are all about, intermittent fasting because they want to turn on cellular cleanup. And I'm like, that's another great piece of the puzzle. But I look at it like I'm building a race car. So it's not just about horsepower. It's not just about torque. It's not just about aerodynamics. It's not just about tires or suspension. You really need to tune all of those things. So I'm the person that will study all the different areas and then try to bring it together. And because I know this stuff is like painfully complex, I'm always thinking to myself, how can I translate this into English? And then how can I make it easy for someone? So
a couple of things, and I identify with what you're talking about relative to wanting to understand how things work. And I remember chemistry class when I was a junior in high school and how fascinated I was with chemistry. And of course, if you are a fan of popular culture, you might be familiar with also Walter White from Breaking Bad, who was one of those guys that loved chemistry in a way and loved to teach it. And I get the good side of Walter White from you, and that and being able to want to explain things in a way that people can understand. But when you think, one of the things that I think about when it comes to these types of behaviors or these types of things that we do, people have over the years have talked about cleanses, and it seems to me that the whole concept of a cleanse is maybe a little bit too late. I mean, drinking a solution of maple syrup and cayenne pepper and lemon juice or whatever for a certain number of days might be effective, but it seems like it's almost a little bit too late if that's what you're trying to do, and that there are a lot of things that you can be doing ahead of time. Am I right in what I'm thinking? Am I thinking here?
I mean, I guess what I'd say is you need to pay attention to both. So you want to minimize the damage, and that's part of it, meaning you're saying before that happens, you really don't want to kill your liver, you really don't want to load your body with toxins. But you also want to turn on these detoxification processes. I'm not a huge fan of the cayenne pepper maple syrup thing, that people do. But if it works for them, that's cool. What I will say is when your body goes into a fasting state. So if you finish dinner at 7 p.m., right? If you stop eating then overnight, about 12 hours later, your body says, wow, I don't have any carbohydrate and I don't have any protein. And at that point, the cell says, I need some Legos to build some things. I need some amino acids. So what does it do? It looks around inside the cell, like if you had a fire going and you ran out of firewood, you'd start looking around at all the newspapers and the magazines and all the junk that's around, and you'd start throwing it in the fire. Well, your cells do something similar. It's called autophagy, where they start looking at all this cellular junk, these misfolded proteins, all this crap that builds up in your cells, and they say, well, I need these parts. And so they take that cellular junk and they break it down into amino acids, and then they start using those amino acids to do good things. So autophagy is critical, but we hardly fast at all as a culture. So what happens at 7 in the morning, they teach you breakfast is the most important meal of the day, which is true if you happen to be, Kellogg or General Mills, because they got to sell breakfast cereal. But, I would say that is bullshit, that's not true. And the best thing you can do at breakfast is to continue your fast. If you can continue fasting until noontime, so at 7 in the morning, autophagy is just starting to kick in. And if you can let it run for 5 more hours, if you don't have your first meal until noon, and that's what they call time-restricted eating or intermittent fasting, your cells do this incredible cellular cleanup. So for me, every day when I wake up in the morning, I don't eat breakfast. I actually just have a cup of coffee that has some short-chain fats. Because although sugar or carbohydrate or protein will break your fast, if you just consume a little bit of fat, that doesn't break the fast. And so the cells continue with autophagy and they continue with the cellular cleanup.
What do you use as a fat in your coffee?
So I use an 8-carbon fat that's isolated from coconut oil. So if you want to buy the Bulletproof brand, it's called Brain Octane Oil. So it's a pure 8-carbon fat. And so you can put a tablespoon of that in your coffee, and then I put in a teaspoon of grass-fed butter, and then I throw it in the blender and I blend it up, and it makes a delicious coffee. So in essence, the creamer, instead of having cream with those long-chain fats, you're creating your own creamer with these short-chain fats. And here's what's cool about those, James, and that is that 8-carbon fat, the body looks at it and says, this is a piece of kindling. It's too small to be stored, so it doesn't store it in your fat cells, number one. Number two, it says it's too small to be used in a cell membrane. So what does it do? It sends it immediately to the liver. The liver converts it into something called BHB, which I'm not going to tell you what that is. Just we'll call it BHB. BHB is a water-soluble molecule that can feed all your cells, and it burns 40% cleaner than if you were running on carbohydrate. And what I mean by that, is it produces 40% fewer free radicals. And so your mitochondria get damaged 40% less. And it's the damage to your mitochondria which makes you become an old man or an old woman. Wow. That's the biggest difference between a 70-year-old and a 20-year-old is their mitochondrial function. So I always want to support my mitochondria. And in essence, the mitochondria they are the battery chargers in your cells. They take energy from food, they create this electron transport chain, and they use that energy to charge up your, to make something called ATP, adenosine triphosphate. And your body runs on ATP. Today, James, you will make and use up your own body weight in ATP. And if you turn off your ATP production, you'll be dead in 20 seconds. Wow. So life comes down to how effectively you can charge up you can take ADP and turn it into ATP. And you just keep cycling that all the time.
And this is all about the mitochondria, you said. And that's a component of individual cells.
Yeah, so the mitochondria, some of your cells will have, a few dozen, some will have a few hundred, but those are the power plant, or I like to think of them as the battery chargers of the cell. Mm-hmm. So I think of ATP as a fully charged lithium battery. And then when the body uses it and plugs it in to do some chemistry or to move your fingers or to think a thought, then it gets converted to ADP. And that's like a lithium battery that's not charged up. That has to be sent back to the mitochondria and has to be charged back up to ATP, and then you just keep doing that over and over again. And as your battery chargers conk out, you conk out. And your body uses your ATP to keep your heart beating, to keep you breathing, but it says, hey, we don't have enough to do any cellular repair. So your skin's going to start looking kind of old and dull. We don't have enough to make melanin in your hair follicles, so your hair is going to start getting gray. We don't have enough to do all these other things. We're going to focus in on just keeping you alive. So it's a kind of a triage thing.
Wow.
So ATP is life. I like to joke that every cell in your body has one favorite song. And of course, it's an 80s tune. And
course.
it's a Dire Straits tune, but they sing different lyrics. So it's it's I want my ATP, because that's all that matters. No ATP and you're dead. And if you look at the old spy movies, you go to a 1960 spy movie, the spy gets caught and he bites into a cyanide capsule. He dies within 20 seconds. Why? Because cyanide shuts down all your mitochondrial function.
No kidding.
That's why it kills you, and it kills you immediately. So as soon as you stop making ATP, you're dead.
Wow.
And that's one of the keys to life. So you're going to hear more and more about mitochondria, and they're fundamental. So you want to do everything you can to keep your mitochondria cranking and kicking butt. And there's books written on it. There's some great stuff out there. And we don't have a chance to really dig into it, but that's one of the fundamentals.
You were talking about intermittent fasting as being a method by which you can enhance the function of your body on a cellular, molecular level, down to the mitochondrial level, I guess, is to say it. How many hours of fasting do you need for it to be effective? In other words, do you have to go from 5 till noon the next day, or what kind of a chunk of time works?
And we're going to talk all in general terms, because some people, everyone has their own biochemistry. But for most people, if you haven't eaten any carbohydrate or protein for 12 hours, then autophagy, that cellular cleanup, turns on. But as soon as you bite into a Danish, or as soon as you put a little sugar in your coffee, or as soon as you eat an egg with some protein, the body turns off autophagy. And so normally it takes about 12 hours for it to kick in. But how many people do you know in this world now that stop eating at 7 and don't eat again until noon? It's really a minority. But the people that are doing it have better biochemistry. They have better metabolism. They get leaner. They look better. So fasting is a magical way to fix your metabolism, even for a lot of people that have type 2 diabetes. So there's a Dr. Jason Fung, who's up in Toronto, has written books on it. He has taken people that have been type 2 diabetic for years, and he's cured them, and his primary tool is using fasting.
Wow.
Because the other thing that happens when you're fasting, James, is at 7 in the morning, your insulin levels start to drop. But if you don't bring in any carbohydrate or any sugar, then at 8 in the morning, 9 in the morning, 10 in the morning, 11, and so on. So fasting allows your insulin levels to drop. And when you have high insulin, you can only burn carbohydrate. You can only burn glucose. You've got to get your insulin levels down to burn fat. And that's one of the tragedies currently in Western societies, is that we eat so much carbohydrate so often that our insulin levels are way too high. So even before we become pre-diabetic or type 2 diabetic, we've already shut off our fat metabolism. So I tell people, look at your blood work, and you can look at 2 parameters, and you can figure out if you have turned off your body's ability to burn fat. And because it all comes back. So that's the second thing fasting does, is it brings down your fasting insulin levels. So the normal range is like 2.5 to 20 or low 20s. When I get my fasting insulin levels checked, I'm always around 3. And it's because I have worked to bring it down. If you saw pictures of me from, let's see, that would have been 94, let's say 25 years ago, my face was a lot puffier. I carried a lot more fat on my body because I thought I should be carb loading, like the marathon runners. And I ate a ton of carbohydrate, and you swell up. Also, when you eat too much carbohydrate, it tells your kidneys to hold on to sodium. So even if you're not using a lot of salt, you still swell up. So if I go back and I eat a huge carbohydrate meal now, I can feel it in my fingers because I can feel the extra fluid in my hands. So once you kind of turn on autophagy and you bring your, I like to run about 30% carbohydrate. For some people, they're going to want to go a little higher than that. Some people are going to want to go a little lower than that. But that level gives you, it really has incredibly beneficial effects on your metabolism. So,
wow. And it seems to me that any of these approaches and techniques towards health and wellness probably affect different people different ways. You know, diabetics, some people have a higher propensity to have those higher insulin levels and than others. And so it seems to me that adopting an approach towards, you know, thinking of yourself, your body as a laboratory. There's probably thousands of different things and approaches that you can take. Intermittent fasting is one of them, but it's all about experimentation and understanding what affects you in the most profound way. Does that make sense?
no, absolutely. Everyone has biochemical individuality. So in your cells, you have a hard drive. That hard drive has all of your genetic information. It's encoded in your DNA. And so each person has their own unique, DNA. And I think of that as the cellular hard drive. But here's the cool part. We thought when we sequenced, the human DNA that we'd have all the answers. But if you really look closely at the science, it appears that only about 20% of your longevity, of your health, comes down to what's in your DNA. What matters more is, do you run those programs or not? Meaning, I could have my iPhone, and I could have an app on the iPhone. That would be like a gene, okay? That app may be incredibly damaging. So if I run it, it might erase all my photos, or it might crash my phone. But I can have bad code, but if I never run it, it doesn't have any negative effect. So it's the science. The science is called epigenetics, which says, am I turning on or turning off these genes? And so you want to pick behaviors that turn on the repair genes and turn on the anti-cancer genes and turn off the damaging ones. So you can have bad code, but if you never run the code, like on your phone, you can have an app on your phone, but if you don't run it, it's never going to crash your phone. And so that's where what you eat, what supplements you take, how much you sleep, how much sun exposure you get, all those things turn on and off different genes. And so you have to be very strategic to turn on the good stuff and turn off the bad things. And so self-experimentation is great, but there are certain things that you can do that have been proven to work across a broad range of the population. But at the end of the
Hey everybody, thanks for staying till the end. I appreciate it, and so does Dr. John. This first video in my influencer series is designed to bring you some information you can use. And hopefully you'll check it out in the future. We're going to be having a lot of interesting stuff coming up. And you can find out more about Dr. John and myself. Just click the links below in the description of this video. And if you are interested, reach out to me and let's schedule a 1-hour free strategy session. It's a coaching session that can get you started on the path towards high performance, a lifelong of personal growth and development that will change your life. Changed mine. Take care of yourselves. Have a great week, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye.